So we're going to look at the next section of creating websites. Today's been a little bit of a dragger of a class. I don't know if you guys are feeling that, but we just kind of like dragged through all kinds of like droning stuff. This class is the longest class ever. So I'm trying to bring a little bit of pump energy in this final thing. And this is what we're going to look at. We're going to see where you can look up all your HTML tags and attributes and see all the CSS selectors and properties. And everybody knows now, like tag, element, that word's interchangeable. So here are all the elements, and then elements have attributes, right? So we could go look at all their attributes, and we could see all the selectors, all the different CSS selectors and all different properties. So you're going to see that. We're going to learn about the border property, and we're going to learn about the border radius and changing the roundness of the border. And then we're going to see padding and margin and learn about the box model. And we're going to learn about something called box sizing border box, and then that's it. That's all we're going to learn. And so that code is right here. And it's border, border radius, display, padding and margin, and box sizing. And all this is on GitHub under my username account goes to 11. GitHub goes to 11. And it's in my repo, HTML, CSS Bootcamp. So you can check that out. All right, so let's first just take a look at border, and then we'll come back to the details as a review. And so here I have three divs, and I've got 4 images, and I'm going to just open this in its own window here so we could see it vertically. And just take a look at that code, and what is that doing? For each div, we're going to have a width, a height, and a border. So a div is a new element. You guys haven't seen that yet in this class. A div is just like a division. Okay, so hey, here's an area where we could put stuff. It's generic tag. You use them a lot. You want to try to use them as little as possible, and you'll still totally use them all the time. But you want to try to use tags which have more semantic meaning. And so those tags would be like section, article, footer, header. And so you'll use those tags instead of div, and you'll become acquainted with them. But div is the generic container. So we've got a couple of divs, and they're going to have a width and a height, and they're going to have a border of 1 pic solid red. Okay, so border 1 pic solid red. And then we have a couple of images, and those images will have a border of 10 pics groove orange red. And you can see some of these have a class to them, dog1, dog2, dog3. And so I've targeted those classes right there, dog1, dog2, dog3. And you might be asking, how if you have 2 rules applied to the same element, which rule wins, right? And so here we have this rule, it gets dog1, but it's also getting image. So both dog1 and image are being applied to that element. Which one's going to win? And so there's this thing called the specificity, and you can look it up. CSS Specificity Calculator. Okay, and it takes you to this web page right here. And you can see that with the Specificity Calculator, elements and pseudo-elements are in the lowest position. Right? Classes and attributes and pseudo-classes are in the next position, like this would be the ones place, the tens place. IDs are in the hundreds place, and inline styles are in the thousands. And so if I had that code there, I have here, let me just do this code right there. I am selecting an H2, which means I'm selecting an element. Like if I just select an H2, right, I got 1 for element. If I selected a class, I got 10. So if 2 different selectors, one's an H2, it's going to have a weight of 1, and the class is going to have a weight of 10. The heavier weight wins, the class wins. Okay? That's just the way that works. And so if we look at this, we can see those borders. And so there are the borders around those divs, and then here are those borders around those images. Kind of fun, putting a border around something. And we have to know about borders so we can start learning about padding, and we can learn about margins. And so first, though, let's learn about border radius. And so here's the same deal, but now I've added border radius. Okay, so let me just move this over, split vertically, and here's what you could do with that. Nice. So those circle images, cool, that's how you do it. Just border radius, and you crank it up, and it starts to round the edge of the border. These weren't rounded much. These were rounded a lot more. And so here you can see border radius was 10 pixel. Here border radius is 100%. And that got applied to image. That got applied to all of the images. got all that code, and then this code here got applied. And if things have the same weight, the CSS specificity weight, then the last one applied wins. Okay, they get applied in order top to bottom, like you're reading a page. All right. So there's a border radius. And then here, let's just see what, there's just other examples of borders here. So there's a div. Let's just see what it looks like. That's kind of cool. And here's another border radius example. That's kind of cool. So you could get funky with the border radiuses, and you could see the code that did that. Right? Kind of neat. Border radius and border radius. So you could specify the different areas. So if like this one here, if we look at that code, border radius is top, right, bottom, left. Top, right, bottom, left. Trouble, TRBL, top, right, bottom, left.
Good.
Trouble, TRBL. And if I'm just going to duplicate that, comment this one out, and if I have that, that's top and bottom, 20%, right and left, nothing. And so if I was to do this one, now it's like that. It went from this to that. So top, right, bottom, left. Okay? And so that is this code here. That's top and bottom, right and left. So when you have all four, it's trouble, TRBL, top, right, bottom, left. When you have two, it's top and bottom, and right and left. And if you have one, it's all of them. So you could set the rounding on each of the corners to get different shapes. And here you could see all four are set, top and bottom, right and left are set, and then each individually. Yeah?
So when you have two values in the border radius, is it the first value is top and bottom, and the second value is left and right?
Yeah, right and left.
Okay.
Left and right, however you want to say it. Yep. And that's going to show up in other places. So just remembering that pattern. All right, so now we have, let's see what this one is doing. So now I think I want to jump to, well, this is fine. So the next thing we jumped to was display. And so display is another property that we could set. And so here we have, on all of the divs, display inline block. Now you'll notice before, the divs were showing up like this. Right? We had 3 divs and we had 4 images. Just like here we have 3 divs and we have 4 images. And when we looked at this one, the divs were all stacked on top of each other and the images were all in line. Okay? That's because the divs are set by default to be block level. They take up a whole block, like stacked up blocks. Everything on the web is a square that stacks on top of each other or lines up side by side. And if it stacks on top of each other, we call it block level. And if it's side by side, we call it inline. So these guys, images are inline. Okay, inline elements. And divs, by their default nature, are block level elements. So they take up, like they just stack like blocks. But you could change their default nature. And so their default display nature, how they display, the way we change that is we say, hey, display, and instead, for all my divs, instead of display, and look at my options here, instead of display block, I've got all these different options. Quite a lot, right? But the main ones would be like, hey, instead of block, I want to try inline or inline block. And if I display these as inline block, right, instead of them being stacked like that, all 3 of my divs now are going to act like inline elements. And they're all in line now. They're not just blocks stacking on top of each other. They're inline block. Cool. So that's changing the display property. What's up?
What's the difference between inline and inline block?
Yeah, you can play with that, but inline block is kind of like a happy medium between block and inline block, because when I just do inline, these guys might collapse. So things have a tendency to collapse more if they're just inline. See? They're all right there. Because there was nothing inside of it, it just collapsed them all. And so inline block says, keep these as block type elements, but make them inline. So display inline block. All right, so now let's look at, that's border radius. That's display inline block. And now we could see padding and margin. So here we have the same code. Right? 3 divs and 4 images. And we're display inline block on our divs. And width and height, we're setting a width and height on our div. So we're saying you're this wide, you're this high. We're giving it a border. 1 pix solid red, that's just the syntax for a border, right? That kind of notation. If you wanted to learn, what is the syntax, the official syntax of border? MDN border, right? And here's border, CSS, MDN. Border CSS property is shorthand property for setting individual border property values. So there's shorthand properties, and I could scroll down, I could start reading through here, right? Like here's some examples. Border 1 pix, 2 pix dotted, medium dash green. You know, formal syntax is a nightmare to read, and some more examples. You know, so MDN, 1 pix solid black, you know, 1 pix dash black gives us that. All right, so we understand this code. Width, height, border, border radius, display inline block, and then we have our image. We have a border, 10 pix groove orange, border radius, padding and margin, right? Padding and margin are new. So everything on the web is a box. And that box has content at its heart, has some content, and then it has padding, border, and a margin around it. It's like a picture. Here's your picture, and then you have padding, and then you have border, which is your frame, and then you have margin, which is the space between the pictures on the walls. So say it with me. Content, and then padding, and then border, and then margin. Picture it in your head. Picture a picture, and that picture's framed, and there's that white kind of like, you know, styrofoam board they put between the picture and the frame sometimes, right? And they cut it out. You know what I'm talking about? So picture that picture, and then so that space between the picture and the frame, that's the padding. And then there's the frame, which is the border. And then on the wall, there's many pictures, and the margin's the space between all the pictures. So here we have padding and margin. So what is that going to do? So here I come over here and make sure I have the right index open. So it spaced them out. We went from this to this. And look at the spacing. So what gave us this spacing right here between the picture and the border? See, no spacing between the picture and the border. Spacing between the picture and the border. What gave us that spacing? Padding. Padding 20 pix. Take that out. No padding. Put it back in. Padding. Okay? And then margin, right? That's the space between the images. Take out the margin. They're all next to each other. Put the margin back in. And notice it dropped them down. It put some margin between here and the top of the page. So I might say top, bottom, 0, left, right, 40. No margin on the top and the bottom, right? There's that thing again, right? Top, bottom, right, left. Top, bottom, right, left. And we could even do 0 top, 40 pixels, TR, right, you know, whatever we wanted on the bottom and whatever we wanted on the left. Now it's only on the right. Okay?
So margin has like how far down they go?
Space between elements. Space between elements. And it could be the top, bottom, right, and left. So I could adjust the space on any top, right, bottom, left between my element and anything else. That's margin. So picture that. Content, and then padding, and then border, and then margin. Okay? Just remember that picture and kind of go through your head. I start with my content, then there's the padding, which is this stuff right here, that area right there. And then there's the border, this one's dashed, and then there's the margin, which is the space between stuff. Okay. So it's called the box model. And the box model is, so now might be a good time to kind of review this, and then we'll look at box sizing, border box. So that's the box model right here. So let's look here. Here are links to all of your HTML tags, all your CSS selectors, all your CSS properties. So if we just fire these off real quick and look at those pages. HTML element reference, and we saw this the other day, right, last week, all those elements there on the left, and some have trash cans, meaning throw them away, don't use them. Some have experimental symbols here, you know, or thumbs down, warning, experimental, right? So you should read those, but there is a list of all the elements, and then here all the attributes for elements. So we looked at source earlier, you know, and we also looked at title, right? And so title was for that thing, and it's a global attribute. I could click that, go back to all the global attributes. So you have all your elements, all of your attributes. Here's a W3 School CSS selector reference, right? So all these different selectors. These are pretty, you know, you could select by class, by ID. Star selects everything. You shouldn't use it. You could select by element. Hey, give me the H1s. Give me the P. This is CSS, right? So when I do my CSS, here's my selector. I'm selecting by element. I'm saying, give me all my divs. Apply this to all my divs. This is my rule set. The selector is a div, meaning apply this declaration block of declarations to all of my divs. Got it? Right? That's an element selector. Okay? You might see element, comma element, multiple elements like div p. You might see element, element, div, and then no comma p, which means all p's, which are beneath divs. Right? So you could start targeting things a little bit more precisely. And then, you know, you've got additional things. So you'll come back and look at this as we go through the course. And then here's a CSS reference. And in this reference, these are all, shows basic syntax of CSS rule. It's all standard CSS properties, right? Because a declaration is properties and values. And so one of them that we've been using is border, right? So here's all the border stuff. Whoa, a lot of border stuff. We were just using the shorthand one, border 1 pix solid red. But we could say instead, right, we could say border width 1 pix, border color red, you know, and I don't know where the solid is because I always use a shorthand one. But again, with that, you know, like when we do background, right, here's all the background stuff. And I always prefer with background not to use the shorthand way. So this would be the shorthand way, and then I just specify the stuff out behind it. With background, I like to say, you know, hey, is it going to repeat? You know, and what's the position going to be? And the size, or, you know, what's the image, background image. I like to specify them individually with background. Just me. But that would be the shorthand. You guys get it, shorthand? You all get it? All right, so those are all the properties. And then we saw the border property, and we saw the border radius property, and we learned the entire top right, bottom left, top, bottom, right, left, or all four at once, or each of the four individually. We'll learn about how we measure stuff, whether we use pixels or percent, right, or some other unit of measurement like M's or REMs or VHs or VWs, and we'll learn the advantages and disadvantages of that. And now we're to the display property. It allows us to control how an element is displayed on a page. Elements have a default display property. Some elements are block level elements. Some elements are inline level elements. You can also use display none to not display an element. Right? So maybe you don't want to show something until something happens. Then you say, okay, let's show it. And you change that property. Right? Padding, margin properties. So we have padding, border, and margin. So content would be before that, and then the content is padding, and then there's a border around all that, and then a margin between all the elements. Here's the box model. Everything on a web page is a square box. We stack and arrange those boxes on the page. This is a visual analogy. So all stuff is in a box. There's padding around the content. There's a border around the content. There's a margin between the different boxes. Right? So this is what it would look like visually. Here's the content, the text. And then there's padding between the content and the border, and there's the border. And then between this element and something else, there's a margin. That's a box model. So here's the problem. Like if we start to change, if we put elements on our page and we say, oh man, I'd like a little bit more space between my elements. And I change that, it's going to throw off the whole layout of my page because it just pushed everything over. Do you get that? right? So how, if I don't want that to happen, how do I prevent that from happening? Enter box sizing border box. So box, and how do you remember this? So box is on the outside, right? If you think of a box is something that's on the outside containing something. So sometimes I'm like, is it border box sizing, or box sizing border box? Box always goes on the outside, so it's box sizing border box. You see how I remember boxes on the outside? You get my mnemonic device, right? If you're in a box, the box walls are on the outside. Here, the box word is on the outside. So now with a box sizing border box, you could change padding and border. So you could change padding and border, and it will no longer push out. So if you've set the width of something, you change padding and border, that width stays the same. It doesn't change on your page, but it does if you increase padding, it then pushes things in. So you have less space for your content inside. Okay, so that's how box sizing border box works. And I have an example here of box sizing border box, which will show you that visually. So same 3 divs, 4 images, and when we see them, right, they're all along the page. And my divs have a width and a height and a border and border radius, display inline box. And then we have width, box sizing, border box on the image, box sizing, border box. Notice the box is on the outside of those 2 phrases when they bring them together. And border, 10 pix groove, orange, red, padding, 20 pix. And so box sizing border box, we have just learned, allows us to change the padding and the border. So here's border and padding, right? And we have a width of 200 pixels for each of those images. So let's play with this for a second and see what happens. So these are 200 for the entire image, 200 pixels. And so if I change this to the border, let's take off box sizing border box, see what happens. They just got bigger. I took off box sizing border box, they got bigger. And if I change the padding from 20 to 200, whoa, man, really changed things, right? But if I have box sizing border box on, interesting. Just squished everything in. So let's not make that quite as severe. We're back here. Let's bring that down to 40. And then we could crank it up to 60. Right? And you can see everything's pushing over. Let's come back down to 30. So 30 space between the picture, 30 pixels between the picture and the border. Right? But I've set a width here of 200. And so now this width is not 200, but if I add that on, that width is now 200, and it just pushes the image in and makes it smaller. So padding and border don't change the width. Like if I took these off, like these images will now fill up the same space. Look at this right here, the P, that's where this image should end, right where that blue line is, right? It's right at the end. Right there, right? And if I took these borders off, it's right at the end. That's 200 pixels. I said this is 200 pixels. This thing I'm styling on the page, I want it to take up 200 pixels. And I don't even need this here because I don't have any padding or border. And those are just 200 pixels, right? 200 pixels. Now if I add padding, if I add border of 50 pixels around each of those, 200 and 200, all that gets me to right here. And if I add 50 on each side, this will get 50, this will get another 50, 100, this will get another 50, 150, this will get another 150, 200. That one image is going to end right here under the 8. The second image will now end under the 8 because there's going to be a lot of white space. Under the 8 because I added this border, right? And it's 50, 50, 50, 50. But if I put this on box sizing border box, no, all these things can't be, these images can't be more than, we have to keep width 200, and when I change padding or border, we squish in instead of pushing out. That's what box sizing border box does. So now we're back to that right beneath the end, and these pictures got smaller. Take the border off. We're still going to be right under the end, but the pictures fill in the space. Web design is funky, dude. There's like funky little like, okay, that's the way it works. You just got to say that. And you learn it and you use it. So that's box sizing border box. And let's look at the rest of the examples, see if it brings any more clarity. Because I think I have one if I remember correctly, which is cool. And dang it, let me just back this up to get it back to the original settings. There we go. So here's a good way to see it. The one up above, right? There's no padding. I add padding, it pushed the border out. See that? This one up here, this had no padding. I add padding, it pushes the border out. Here this has no padding, right? And then I add box sizing border box, padding, box sizing border box, and I add padding, and it pushes the content in but keeps this element the same size. Oh, right? Isn't that cool? You see that? That's what box sizing border box does. So the box sizing stops at the border of the box. All right, we're keeping the border of the box the same. So as we add padding or border, things squish in, and the width on the page stays the same, so it doesn't throw off other elements, push them onto the next line. Box sizing border box. Let's see, there's one more example. I think it's exactly like that one. We'll check it out, just see if it has any value. Same one, right? But here, instead of padding, we're using border. So no border, and then we add border, and we have box sizing border box. Content gets squished in. No border, no box sizing border box. We add border, and it just grows out. So that's what box sizing border box does. You've stayed more than your 10 minutes. Let me finish this up for you, Ruben. And so, were you glad you stayed?
Yeah.
All right. He's like, dude, I'm out of here. Today's dragging and sucking. It's like, all right, cool. Todd brought it in the last half hour. Box sizing property, right? You could read that. And then there's a review. And all HTML tags, attributes, CSS selectors, properties, the border property, border radius property, display property, display inline, display block, display inline block, display none. Padding and margin properties, padding, border, margin, box model, box sizing, border box. All the HTML tags we have learned so far. HTML head, body, meta. It's for meta information. We didn't talk about it. Title changes up in your HTML tab. Your browser tab changes the words in the browser tab. Paragraph heading, unordered list, ordered list, list item, link, which is linking to CSS. Does link use href or source as an attribute? Href, right? And what does image use? Image use href or source? Source. Yeah, and let's just confirm that because man, that is, right? So link, right? Href. And image, source. It's like one of those things your editor's always filling in for you and you're like, oh, wait a minute, which is it? And you got to think about it, right? And then we anchor tag, paragraph tag, and div. And then CSS properties we've learned so far: width, height, background color. The star selector, we didn't really talk about it, but they'll select everything on a page and apply something to it, and you don't want to use it. It's not performant. Color changes font color, font size. Display, inline, block, none. Padding, border, margin, box sizing, border box, border radius, round at the corners on an element. Background image, background size, background repeat. General knowledge, status codes, developer tools, right? This is all stuff we've learned so far. Opening tags, closing tags, self-closing tags, right? So all that should make sense. Nesting tags, right? We have inside the body tags, we put other tags, paragraphs, things. We're nesting tags within tags. parent, child, ancestor, descendant, sibling. That's how we talk about tags. So in this situation, H1 is a descendant of body. H1 is nested within body, right? You know, these paragraphs are descendants of this div. This is its ancestor. These are its descendants. This is its parent. These are the children, right? These paragraphs right here are all siblings of each other. These 3 P's are all siblings of each other at the same level. So that's one of the ways we talk about it. Rule sets, the selector, the declaration blocks, and the declarations, properties, and values. Separation of concerns. HTML is for the structure, CSS is for the formatting, JavaScript is for the functionality on the client side. Linking CSS to HTML, you can link external style sheets with the link tag. You could have internal styles between style tags. And you could have inline right inside an element, but we're not even going to talk about it. IDEs, GitHub, version control software, using GitHub, HTML and CSS, naming conventions, files, index.html is the primary one, main.css for CSS, folders, img, CSS, JS would be folders you might use in your site, and tag attributes, so HTML element attributes, relative URLs versus absolute URLs, comments, and the box model, where everything's a box. Content with padding, borders, and margin, right? And then box sizing border box allows us to change the padding and the border without increasing the size on our page of the thing. If we said the width is this much, it stays that much with box sizing border box. So that's some good stuff. Like you guys are just been sitting here getting things dripped on you and getting a little bit like, man, it's a long class. It is a long class. But when I go through that list, how many of you are like, that's pretty good for 3 days, right? That's pretty good for 3 days. Like you guys are starting to get some skills for 3 days. And so I want you to work those skills, and your homework is going to be these hands-on exercises. And you got the solutions right there, but the hands-on exercises, place a div on a page, format the div to have a width, height, and background color. Easy. Take the code from hands-on exercise number 1 and round the corners of the div. Cool, border radius, right? Take the code from hands-on exercise number 2 and give the div a grooved border, which is 20 pixels. Okay, cool. You know, border, 20 pixels, grooved, orange. There's the setting. Create a new HTML document, place 2 divs on the document, format both divs with the following declarations. Width, height, border, and margin, top, bottom, right, left, right? Also format the second div with this declaration, box sizing border box. Take the code from the hands-on exercise 3 and give the div a background image by using the following CSS declarations. Background image, background cover, and then description. This is a description of this exercise, or that video. So those are going to be your hands-on exercises for this week. Good? How many people are like pumped? Cool. What's that question?
What do the hands-on exercises do for this week?
Like in 20 minutes. Do them. Whoopsh, whoopsh. Row. Row. Thursday.
Okay.
You guys could be able to knock this out pretty quick. All right, so let's call it. If you want to hang out and work, you can hang out and work. If you want to go, Ruben, have a good trip.